Hello, first graders. We're back to read the next installment in the A to Z mystery series. Today we're on to V, which is The Vampire's Vacation. This one sounds spooky. Here's the first chapter picture. Looks like they have a bunch of newspapers. And they're going to the grocery store. Chapter 1. Careful going over the curb or you'll spill the whole pile, Dink cautioned his friend Josh. You and Ruth Rose are supposed to be holding on to it, Josh answered. We are holding, Josh, Ruth Rose said, but you're pulling the wagon too fast. An hour before, Dink and Josh had helped Ruth Rose clean some old newspapers out of her basement. Now they were hauling the papers to the recycling bin at the supermarket. For the job, Ruth Rose borrowed her little brother Nate's wagon. It was early August, and the sky was filled with cotton candy clouds. The kids wore shorts and t-shirts. Ruth Rose liked to dress in all one color. Her shorts and shirt were sky blue. They matched her eyes, headband, and sneakers. Now she's even matching her eyes. The kids crossed Main Street in front of the supermarket. Almost there, Dink said, struggling to keep the tower of papers from toppling. A drop of sweat fell from the tip of his nose. Dink's real name was Donald David Duncan. Most people called him Dink, except his mother when she was annoyed with him. The kids tugged the wagon in a row of tall wooden bins at the side of the supermarket. Each bin was labeled according to what was being recycled, and one was for newspapers. Dink pulled open the door, and the kids began tossing bundles of papers inside. Boy, that was hard work, Josh announced when they were finished. He grabbed the wagon handle. Let's go inside and get something to drink. Dink and Ruth Rose followed Josh into the supermarket. The automatic door swooshed open, and they were immediately bathed in cold air. They found a machine in the frozen food section, and each bought a cold soda. Guys, look, Josh whispered. He tipped his soda can toward the meat counter. A few customers waited while the butcher sliced steaks. Why are we looking at steaks? Dink asked. You're always thinking of your next meal, Josh, said Ruth Rose. No, I mean the guy standing there, Josh said. He pointed to a man dressed completely in black. His slick black hair was also black. His skin was ghostly pale. Dark sunglasses were perched above his long nose. So here are the kids with their wagon and their drinks. And here's this weird-looking guy at the meat counter. I wonder who he is, Josh said. I've never seen him in Greenlawn before. I haven't either, Dink said. But so what? I don't know everybody in town. Ruth Rose peeked over a display of frozen chickens to get a better look. Something about him looks familiar, she said. Do you know what he looks like to me? Josh said. A man buying meat? Dink asked. Josh shook his head. No, he looks like a vampire. Dink grinned at Josh. Have you even seen a vampire, Josh? He asked. No, but I know what they look like. Josh pointed toward the man. Vampires have skinny lips and really pale skin like him. Ruth Rose laughed. Your skin is pale. Are you a vampire? She asked. I am not pale, Josh said. I have freckles. Me too. The man strolled away from the meat counter. Let's follow him, Josh said. Why? Dink asked. Because he's weird, Josh said. Who wears sunglasses inside a store? Lots of people do, Josh, Dink said. Guys, we have to go home to get more newspapers, Ruth Rose said. My mom is paying us, remember? We can do that later, Josh said, finishing his drink. Come on, the guy's leaving. Shaking their heads, Dink and Ruth Rose followed Josh, who took off after the man in black. Suddenly, the man stopped in the doorway. He turned and seemed to stare right at the three kids. The store lights reflected off the glasses like tiny lightning bolts. The man smiled and nodded at the kids. That is a little bit creepy. He does look like a vampire. Dink, Josh, and Ruth Rose froze. The man in black shoved the door open and walked out. Oh my gosh, Josh whispered. He saw us following him. No, he saw you following him, Ruth Rose said. I'm going home to help my mom. The guy is pretty strange, Dink said. I got goosebumps when he looked at us. That's because it's air conditioned in here, Ruth Rose said. Can we go now? I want to see where he's going, Josh said. Crouching, he pulled the wagon through the door. Dink and Ruth Rose were right behind him, laughing. The stranger made his way down Main Street. The kids stayed behind him. Suddenly, he disappeared inside a doorway. He's gone into Ellie's, Josh said. Gee, I don't know why. I didn't know vampires ate real food, Dink cracked. Don't they just drink blood? Josh ignored Dink. We're going in too, Josh said, but let's wait a couple of minutes. We don't want to look like we're following him. But we are, Ruth Rose pointed out. Well, we don't have to advertise it, Josh said. Let's just get ice cream like we usually do. The kids left the wagon outside and pushed through the door to Ellie's diner. Ellie had her back to them. The kids glanced around at all the seats. The man in black was nowhere to be seen. Where'd he go? Josh whispered. Are you sure he came in here? Dink asked. Maybe he went to the pet shop next door. I know he came in here, Josh said. He peeked under a booth. Let's ask Ellie. Ask me what? Ellie asked. She turned around just as she finished sticking a small round Band-Aid to the side of her neck. Well, that's weird. It's sort of hard to see, but you can. There's her Band-Aid. Why would she be sticking a small round Band-Aid on her neck? This, by the way, is the chapter picture. Oh, and I just got excited because this book has my favorite corner picture, because it's actually two corner pictures. The bat flaps its wings. On one page they're up, and on the other page they're down. I think that's fun. Okay, chapter 2. Did a guy all dressed in black come in here? Josh asked. Ellie looked confused. In my diner? When? Just a minute ago. He had black hair and pale skin, Dink said. Ellie shook her head. I don't know, she said. He might have. I was out back getting supplies. I saw him walk in here, Josh said, peering over the counter. Well, he's not here now, Dink said. Let's get some ice cream. Ellie followed them to the booth. Cones all around? She asked the kids. Your usual flavors? The kids all nodded, and a few minutes later, Ellie brought 3 cones. Butter crunch for Dink, pistachio for Josh, and strawberry for Ruth Rose. As they licked their cones, Josh stared through the window. What are you looking for? Dink asked. The vampire guy, Josh said. He's not a vampire, Josh, Ruth Rose said. Everyone knows vampires sleep during the day and come out at night. They hate the sun. Maybe this one's on vacation, Josh said. Dink started to laugh and nearly choked. Josh, why would a vampire pick Greenlawn for his vacation? He asked. But Josh wasn't listening. He had his nose against the window. There he is again, Josh shrieked. Dink and Ruth Rose craned their necks to look. Ellie walked over to see what the commotion was about. There he is outside, sort of skulking around. The man in black was crossing Main Street near Swan Pond. Doesn't he look like a vampire to you? Josh asked Ellie. Ellie didn't answer. When Dink glanced at her, Ellie seemed afraid. She backed away from the window and walked behind the counter. Josh crunched the last of his cone, then pushed his way out of the booth. He's heading down Main Street. I'm following him, he announced. You guys coming? Sure, why not, Ruth Rose said. I want to be there when the vacationing vampire grabs you. Can I at least finish my cone? Dink asked. He and Ruth Rose followed Josh out onto the street. He's going into the book nook, Dink told Josh. I wonder what vampires read when they're on vacation, Ruth Rose said, taking a last bite of her cone. Let's find out, Josh said, heading for the bookstore. They stopped in front of Howard's barbershop while Dink finished his ice cream. Josh kept an eye on the book nook door. Okay, let's go, he said, as Dink wiped his mouth on his sleeve. Dink and Ruth Rose followed him into the book nook. A bell tinkled and Mr. Paskey looked up from behind a counter. He smiled and waved at the kids. 2 teenagers were reading magazines. The only other person in the store was Mr. Paskey. He's not here, Dink whispered. I don't believe this, Josh choked out. The guy keeps disappearing. What does he do, walk through walls? Hi, kids, can I help you? Mr. Paskey asked. Hi, Mr. Paskey, Dink said. Did a man wearing black just come in here? Mr. Paskey rubbed his neck. No, I don't think so, but I was in the storeroom for a minute or two. I suppose he could have come in, then left again. Josh shook his head. I was watching. He came in, but he didn't come out, he said. Sorry, Mr. Paskey said. He raised his eyebrows and shrugged. Did you guys leave this? Asked Mr. Paskey, reaching for the cash register. He held up a $20 bill. The kids shook their heads. How odd, Mr. Paskey said. Someone left this bill on the counter. He looked at the money for a second, then shrugged again. Do you have any books about vampires? Josh asked. I think there's one over in nonfiction, Mr. Paskey answered. It's called Vampires Among Us by Dan Starch. The kids looked around among the nonfiction books, then looked for Starch. They found a book by Wanda Starr, then one written by Peter Starkey. The space between them was empty. The book they're looking for isn't there. Mr. Paskey, said Josh, we found where the book should be, but it's gone. Mr. Paskey walked over to the shelf. He put his finger in the space between the 2 books. Now that is peculiar, he muttered, crouching lower. It was here an hour ago when I dusted this shelf. When Mr. Paskey leaned over, his neck was level with Dink's eyes. As usual, Mr. Paskey wore a crisp white shirt, a necktie, and a suit jacket. Dink smiled. Even in this hot weather, Mr. Paskey dresses up, he thought. And then Dink noticed a small round Band-Aid right above Mr. Paskey's shirt collar. That makes 2 people who have small round Band-Aids on their necks. Very suspicious. Chapter 3. The kids thanked Mr. Paskey and left his shop. I wonder who left that $20 bill on Mr. Paskey's counter, Ruth Rose said. I bet it was that guy. I know he went in there, Josh griped. People don't just vanish. But maybe vampires vanish, Ruth Rose said, grinning at Josh. Dink laughed. He predicted to read the newspaper headlines. Vacationing vampire vanishes. Laugh, you guys, laugh, Josh said, but I think that guy is definitely weird. And did you notice how Mr. Paskey didn't even think it was strange that some guy disappeared inside his shop? Dink thought for a minute. Mr. Paskey's not the only one who's not acting like himself. When we saw that guy through the window in Ellie's diner, Ellie looked afraid of something, he said. She was probably afraid Josh would choke because he was gobbling his ice cream so fast, Ruth Rose said. Now can we go home? We can have lunch at my house. A few minutes later, they reached Ruth Rose's house. They walked into the backyard with the wagon. Ruth Rose's brother Nate was sitting at the picnic table. In front of him were a box of plastic action figures, some crayons, and drawing paper. "Hi, Nate. What are you doing?" Dink asked. "Drawing, my guys," Nate said, holding up a picture. It showed Spider-Man and Superman fighting a purple monster. "Where's Mommy?" Ruth Rose asked her brother. "Here I am," her mother said, popping out from the open cellar hatchway. "Thanks for taking those newspapers away," she said. "There are plenty more down here when you feel like working. I left sandwiches and lemonade in the fridge for you." "Thanks, Mom," Ruth Rose said. "We'll take more papers later." The kids brought their lunch to the picnic table, and Ruth Rose cleared a space. As they ate, they watched Nate trying to write words on his paper. "Can I help?" Ruth Rose asked her brother. "Right, I give up," said the monster. Nate told Ruth Rose. He handed her a purple crayon. "That's a neat color," Dink said. "It's party purple," Nate told him. "And guess what? It smells like jelly beans." Ruth Rose printed the words, then pointed to each one in turn as she read them aloud to her brother. "Thanks, Ruth Rose," said Nate. He grabbed the picture and ran away to show his mother. There's all of his action figures. And they're all eating lunch. They're always eating. I wonder if that guy we saw sleeps hanging upside down, Josh said. "I hate to spoil your fun," Dink said. "Bats sleep that way, not people." "And vampires aren't real," Ruth Rose said. "Dracula was a real person," Josh said. "I read about him." "But Dracula wasn't really a vampire," said Ruth Rose. "And he died a long time ago." Josh wiggled his eyebrows. "How do we know he's really dead?" Ruth Rose laughed. She reached into Nate's box and pulled out a miniature plastic Count Dracula. "Here he is," she said. "See," Josh said, "he looks just like our guy, all dressed in black. Except this one has long fangs," Ruth Rose said, standing the vampire on his plastic feet. Painted on blood dripped from his fangs. "The guy we're following might have fangs," Josh said. "We didn't see his teeth." Suddenly, Dink remembered something. "Guys, did you notice that Mr. Paskey was wearing a Band-Aid on his neck?" he asked. "I did," Ruth Rose said. "A little round one, right here." She put a finger on the side of her own neck. "Well, Ellie had one just like it on her neck," Dink went on. Josh stopped chewing and his eyes widened. "Swallow, Josh," Ruth Rose said. Josh gulped, then took a swig of lemonade. "Don't you guys get it?" he asked. "Vampires bite people on their necks to get blood. I'm not kidding around anymore. I think that guy really is a vampire." "The only vampires are on TV, Joshua," Ruth Rose said. "Says who?" Josh argued. "There are a lot of things that people don't think are real, then they turn out to be." Dink was staring at Josh. "Like what?" he said. Josh stared back. Like giant squids," he said. "But giant squids are real," Ruth Rose said. "Scientists have found their bodies washed up on the shore. No one's found any vampire bodies that I know of." "That doesn't mean there aren't any," Josh said. "There could be a lot of vampires that people don't know about." "And do you think that guy in black is one of them?" Dink asked. Josh nodded. "I'm starting to." "Well, whoever he is, I think I've seen him somewhere," Ruth Rose said. "I say we try to find him again," Josh said. "Why?" asked Dink. "For one thing, I want to know how he keeps disappearing," Josh said. He grinned at Dink. "And I know you're curious about those Band-Aids on Ellie and Mr. Paskey." "Okay, I admit it," Dink said. "So, where do we look?" Ruth Rose collected the paper plates and cups. "I can't believe I'm going vampire hunting," she said. "If he's staying in town," Josh said, standing up, "the first place to check is the Shangri-La Hotel." A few minutes later, the kids were on their way to the hotel. They kept their eyes open, but the man in black was nowhere to be seen. When they walked into the hotel's cool lobby, Mr. Linklater was talking on the phone. He looked up and nodded as the kids approached the counter. Soon Mr. Linklater hung up on the phone. "Hello there," he said. "What brings you to the Shangri-La?" "We saw a stranger in town and wondered if he's staying here," Josh plunged in. Mr. Linklater raised one eyebrow. "And why are you so curious about this stranger?" he asked. Ruth Rose came to Josh's rescue. "Because he looks familiar," she said. "I'm trying to figure out where I've seen him before." Mr. Linklater squinted his eyes and pursed his lips. He tapped a long finger against the countertop. "Describe this person, please." "He's dressed all in black," Dink said. "Black hair all slicked back," Josh said. "And his skin is real pale." They're at the Shangri-La a lot. They were there in the haunted hotel. Remember that one? That was a good one. And his skin is real pale. "Ah," said Mr. Linklater. "That would be Dr. Kula." He looked at his register. A. Kula, a doctor from New York City. "Is he in his room right now?" Ruth Rose asked. Mr. Linklater looked down at Ruth Rose. His mustache twitched as if he might smile. "You know I can't tell you that," he said. "Shangri-La guests pay for privacy, and I make sure they get it." Mr. Linklater shut the register with a soft thud. "Was there anything else?" "No thanks," Dink said, looking up at Mr. Linklater. Then his mouth fell open. 3 inches to the right of Mr. Linklater's Adam's apple was a small, round Band-Aid. Another Band-Aid on a person's neck. Crazy. Chapter 4. "Thanks a lot, Mr. Linklater," Dink stammered. He hurried Josh and Ruth Rose out of the hotel. Did you see Mr. Linkletter's neck? He whispered when they were on the sidewalk. He had on a Band-Aid just like Ellie's and Mr. Paskey's. Are you sure? Ruth Rose asked. Dink put a finger on his own neck. It was right here, he said. Now do you guys believe something weird is going on? Josh croaked. A vampire is stalking Greenlawn. He's drinking everyone's blood. We gotta call 911. Josh, calm down, Ruth Rose said. There could be a lot of reasons for those 3 Band-Aids. Name one, Josh said. Mr. Linkletter could have cut himself shaving, Ruth Rose suggested. Okay, but Ellie didn't cut herself shaving, did she? Josh retorted. It's strange that all 3 of them needed Band-Aids on the same day, Dink put in. Yeah, and the people wearing them are acting strange, Josh said. Mr. Linkletter never gives names out of his guests, but he did today. Josh squinted his eyes. I'll bet if we looked under those Band-Aids, we see fang marks. Ruth Rose grinned. Are you going to go back inside and ask Mr. Linkletter to take off his Band-Aid? No, but we have to find this guy, Josh said. He's already turned Ellie and Mr. Paskey and Mr. Linkletter into vampires. We have to save Greenlawn. Josh, calm down, Dink said. I agree that something weird is going on around here, but I don't think that guy is a vampire. And even if he is, what can we do about it? Run him out of town, Josh said. Ruth Rose shook her head. Run him out of town? How? Just then a shadow fell over the kids. A voice asked, What are you guys whispering about? The kids jumped and Josh let out a moan, but it was only their friend Livy Nugent. She worked as a maid in the Shangri-La. Hi, Livy, Ruth Rose said. How are Nicole and Ned? Growing like weeds and eating like lion cubs, Livy said. So what's up? Do you know Dr. Kula? Dink asked. He's staying in the hotel. Livy nodded. He checked in last night from New York. Wears all black, right? She said. That's him, Josh said. Have you been inside his room? Sure I have, Livy said. When he checked in, I took him up in the elevator. Did you happen to notice anything weird? Josh persisted. Livy shook her head. Not really, she said, starting to enter the hotel. She stopped and turned around. There was one strange thing, Livy said. As soon as we got in the room, Dr. Kula lay down on the bed. He asked me to turn up the air conditioning to extra cold. I did and asked him if he wanted another blanket. He said no, he'd brought his own. Livy lowered her voice. When I turned around, he was lying there with his eyes closed, wrapped in a black cape. This guy sounds weirder and weirder. The 3 kids stared at Livy. She shook her head. Poor guy must have been exhausted, she said. He fell asleep so fast I thought he was dead. Livy wiggled her fingers goodbye and entered the lobby. Vampires sleep in cold coffins, Josh moaned, and they wear capes. Magicians and Salvation Army people also wear capes, Josh, Ruth Rose said. Dr. Kula could be a magician, Dink said. That might explain how he escaped from Ellie's diner and the book nook without us seeing him. And does he also make Band-Aids appear on people's necks? Josh asked. I'm going home. He started walking up Main Street. Why? Asked Dink. I thought you wanted to find Dr. Kula. I do, Josh said over his shoulder, but first we need protection. Ruth Rose looked at Dink. They both caught up to Josh. What kind of protection? She asked. Garlic, Josh said. Garlic? Dink and Ruth Rose repeated, staring at Josh. Vampires hate garlic, Josh said. We have to hang some around our necks. Around our necks? Dink said. Josh, garlic stinks. Josh rolled his eyes. Duh, that's what keeps the vampires away. Chapter 5. A few minutes later, the kids reached Josh's house. Josh marched around the house to the backyard. His twin brothers, Brian and Bradley, were playing with blocks on the picnic table. Under the table, Josh's dog Pal was sound asleep. Where's Mom? Josh asked the twins. I'm out here, came a voice from the vegetable garden. Josh ran toward his mother, yelling, I need some garlic. Ruth Rose shook her head. Do you think Josh is serious about this vampire stuff, or is he just fooling around? She asked Dink. Dink shrugged. I think he really believes that guy is a vampire, he said. What do you think? Ruth Rose asked. I don't believe in vampires, Dink said. But what about those Band-Aids? Dink and Ruth Rose sat at the table with Brian and Bradley. The twins each had a pile of letter blocks, and they were trying to make words. What are you spelling? Dink asked them. Our names, but we don't know how to spell, Bradley said. I'll help you, Ruth Rose said. Do you know what letter your name begins with? B, both boys yelled. They each picked out a B block. That's right, Ruth Rose said. She selected 4 more blocks to spell out Brian. That spells Brian, she said. Then she chose more blocks and spelled out Bradley. Josh came around and sat by them. He had an armload of green stalks with white bulbs on one end. Ew, cried Brian. Smelly. Yuck, yelled Bradley. The 2 boys raced away from the table holding their noses. So this is what garlic looks like when it's growing, Dink said, sniffing one of the stalks. Ruth Rose held her nose. Did you tell your mom why you wanted the garlic, Josh? Josh grinned slyly. I didn't tell her about the vampire man, he said. I just said I needed garlic for an experiment. Josh started weaving stalks together. I think I'll pass on the garlic, Dink said. Okay, but don't try to steal mine when the vampire sneaks up on you, Josh said. I wish I could remember where I saw him before today, Ruth Rose said. She spelled out Dr. Kula with blocks. You forgot his first initial, Dink said. He picked up an A block and slid it between the R and C blocks. There's it's Brian and Bradley at the bottom, and now they spelled Dr. A. Kula. Suddenly, Josh dropped his garlic stalks. The block spelled Dracula. Dink and Ruth Rose stared at the word. To Dink, it seemed as if everything froze. Pal stopped snoring. Now do you guys believe me? Josh whispered. Well, okay, Ruth Rose said after a minute. Did anybody catch what those letters spell out? Dracula. They were spelling Dr. A. Kula, but it actually spells out Dracula. Well, okay, Ruth Rose said after a minute. The letters in Dr. Kula's name also spelled Dracula, but that's just a coincidence. Dink let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. I don't know, he said quietly. The band-aids on Mr. Paskey, Ellie, and Mr. Linkletter could be a coincidence, and anyone could own a black cape, but this? Dink ran his finger along the 7 blocks that spelled Dracula. This can't be a coincidence. Ruth Rose sighed. Okay, I guess I agree that this is all a little spooky, she said, but I still don't think Dr. Kula is a vampire. I don't believe in vampires like I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in ghosts either, Dink said, but I do believe what I see, and I think we should go talk to Officer Fallon. Okay, let's go see if he believes in vampires, Ruth Rose said. Wait a sec, Josh said. He had finished weaving a loop of garlic stalks. It was too small to slide over his head, so he plopped it on his top of his hair like a crown. How do I look? He asked. Like a smelly salad, commented Dink. He looks very silly, and apparently he's very smelly. But I think that's where we're going to leave it this video. Hope you're enjoying the Vampire's Vacation so far. I am. It's a good mystery. We'll be back to finish the rest of it another day. Bye.